Michael Kamen is a musician who breaks down many musical barriers. He's written ballet scores, played in rock and roll bands with people such as Dave Bowie and Dave Gilmour. He has made orchestral arrangements for the Eurythmics, Pink Floyd and George Harrison. And his music has become the emotional backbone of many great films such as Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, James Bond, The New Robin Hood, Mona Lisa, and of course Terry Gilliam's Brazil. When he finally decided to write some music of his own, he was able to distill and draw from these influences in his life to create a unique voice of his own.
There was always a piano, and I was always banging on it, and always sitting in the middle of total chaos. There was always a world going on around me, and I was sitting right in the middle of the living room, completely and happily buried inside the piano. And I wanted to be a composer. And when I was really little, as soon as I could form the thought, I was thinking, yeah, that's a good job. My older brother also took piano lessons. And he had Liszt and Mozart and Bach and Brahms and all those guys in their little plastic bus. And I used to look at them and think, oh, that's very jolly, isn't it? I'll be a composer when I grow up. You know, I never studied composition. I never studied arranging. I barely studied piano. I studied oboe. One of the special things I didn't study was conducting. And so it was, to my horror, the first time I did a film score, I just put the last notes on paper and then sort of looked at the orchestra taking shape in the studio and said, oh my God, I got to conduct. And you know, I realized it was up to me. Up till very recently, the only time I'd ever conducted was in a studio. I'll start with Brazil. One, two, three, two.
Michael Kamen, the first I heard of him was he was doing the film Brazil for Terry Gilliam. And we had a dinner party which Terry Gilliam was invited to, and he brought Michael along. So that's how I met him, and right from that moment I thought, what a charmer.
Brazil is, I think, my favorite film that I've worked on. It's one of my favorite films that I've seen too, which is always very nice. But the music is a very integral part of the film. I don't think I leap out from behind the screen. I'm supporting the action and supporting the emotions. Sometimes the music is deliberately in your face because you're making a point about the music, but the music is part of the fabric of the film. After that, I did Mona Lisa for George's film company, and I remember Pete Townsend coming up to me at a party some night and said, you better watch it, you know, you're only doing all these Mona Lisas and Brazils, and you know, pretty soon they just come to you just to do other people's music, just to adapt other people's music for films. He wasn't completely wrong, but...
He said, please don't leave me. He said, I'll buy you a diamond necklace. He said, I don't want one. He said, I'll buy you a spiller in the south of France. She says, I don't want one. He said, well, what do you want? He says, I want a divorce. He says, I wasn't thinking of spending that kind of money.
We employed him, actually, Handmade Films employed him. He did the film called Mona Lisa, Bob Hoskins, Michael Caine and Robbie Coltrane film. And then after that, I did the music with Michael to this film called Shanghai Surprise, you know, the famous Sean Penn and Madonna movie, which was really fun because for me, I've never done film scores. Well, I've done one score before, back in the 60s, but in that business, you know, you're always working behind the edit. You know, you can't start until they've got the edit. And by that time, they've spent all the money anyway, so there's no money to pay the musicians. So, you know, Michael is particularly good at getting a soundtrack together quickly. The nice thing about him is that he's a trained classical musician, and he's not a musical snob. You know, usually a lot of classical people tend to, you know, feel a bit above everybody else. I mean, they forget the most classical music was actually pop tunes written back in the 16th century or something. But no, that's the nice thing about Michael. His musical tastes will go right across the board, you know, through all kinds of ethnic music, rock and roll. I mean, he's been in rock and roll bands. He did a film score once to a little sort of cult movie called Polyester, which not too many people know about.
Polyester. You know John Waters, who made Pink Flamingos, all those Divine movies. He made a movie called Polyester in Smellorama, or Smell-O-Vision, I can't, Odorama, that's what it was. Everybody had a card, a scratch and sniff card, when you went into the cinema, and there was a doctor up in the corner of the screen who would point to a number, and a bell would go off, I think a little piece of theme music that I wrote. And you'd scratch and sniff this card, and you'd see somebody pulling some roses in your face, and you'd sniff the card, and it didn't smell at all like roses, and then she'd stick some old sneakers in your face. And that was the smell you felt. Once I'd started writing a lot of movie scores, I realized I needed to write a piece of music of my own, because it's very simple when you're writing the score for Lethal Weapon, or the score for Baron Munchausen, or the score for Brazil, to have your brain taken from there to there, from the 17th century to, you know, whatever collaborations you get into. It's important to remember your own voice, what it is you had to say. After a while, I found that I wasn't writing songs anymore. I was writing pieces. And I couldn't come up with words, although I could sing the tunes. I'm not really a piano player. I can play at the piano, but I'm really not a pianist. I'd become one of those little plaster busts that used to sit on my piano. I'd become a composer. And I needed a voice to play my music. I needed a structured sound to focus for the stuff I was doing. And so the focus for these pieces is David Sanborn. One of the first things I thought of when I listened to these pieces, I looked at them and said, well, what are they? And I realized they were my family. So one by one, I figured out which tune was which person. Sasha's my firstborn daughter, and eternally the love of my life. She's got her head in the clouds, has always had her head in the clouds, and I hope she always keeps her head in the clouds. The song was just very airy, I thought. It had like a tune, do. Music is generally meant to soothe, to warm people's hearts, to make them feel good about living. And the music that I write for myself and for everybody else to listen to if they care to is about life. It's a song to humanity. Great lead instruments of rock and roll are the guitar and the saxophone, both of which, if you just play them on their own, are absolute horrific instruments. The electric guitar, without a style attached to it, is awful. You need the players, you need the instrumentalists to give a voice to that instrument. And what's so great about people like David Gilmour and David Sanborn is that their personality comes out in the instrument. So you're not just listening to the electric guitar. These guys express the force and the strength of their personality.
About Face was my second solo album, and Michael did some work on that. We did a track which I wrote, I think, on a Tuesday afternoon, and we'd booked the orchestral session for the Thursday. And I just plonked it down on a piano and sent the cassette over to him. And on the Thursday morning, we were recording that same piece with a large orchestra just 2 days later, and it was, for me, fantastic to hear what he had done. Totally in sympathy with what I had already written, and just like it had only been conceived of sort of less than 48 hours before, in my mind.
People have used strings on popular music, you know, when you think of things like Sinatra and that, but when it comes down to like rock, pop, or whatever, like Beatles, I suppose we were the first people to use certain orchestrations and cellos and horns and things like that. But for Michael, I think, although he's classically trained and he gets most of his time is taken up doing film scores and things that are more like classically oriented, he basically is a rock and roll person too, and that's why this is interesting, the things he's writing now, like this David Sanborn piece and the piece with Eric Clapton. You know, it's good. I think music shouldn't just be in little pigeonholes. I think you can do anything you like. If you can think of it, you can do it.
There used to be, many years ago, it's not so much now, sort of inbuilt, sort of almost bigotry, dare I say, you know, of, oh, you know, rock and roll musicians or jazz musicians even, you know. These barriers are all breaking down. Even within music, they're breaking down, you know. I mean, George Harrison's done and continues to do so much for, you know, the breaking down of Indian music to Western ears. Yehudi Menuhin, from the classical, you know, to Indian music. And now we've got, again, as I said before, we've got people like Michael Kamen coming in and confronting classical musicians by the throat, you know, with rock and roll and wool, you know, and it works.
There's a lot of people out there who are writing music who don't open their eyes to the fact that they can write any bloody thing they want. They don't have to write film music. They don't have to write 30-second jingles for soap. You know, you don't have to do that. The fact is that studio musicians don't have to sit there playing long, dull notes for somebody's TV commercial. They can make their own music. You know, it's our responsibility to make our own music. Zoe's my second daughter. She's now 10. And when David was playing the song, he was being very aggressive because that's his style. And I said, come on, man, it's Zoe. This is for Zoe. And of course, he'd been living in the house for a month or so while we were working on the record. And he's heard me always shouting upstairs. We got 5 stories here going, Zoe, oh, Zoe. And that's the first phrase he plays on Zoe. He goes, oh, Zoe, with the saxophone. This is Zoe, and this is Zoe. Sanborn goes, oh, Zoe, oh, Zoe, oh, Zoe. I spent many, many years picking out tunes on the piano and trying to combine them in various forms. And I'd get a bit and I'd say, oh, I know what that's for. You know, oh, that's a good bit. And I'd kind of file it away quietly while I went on writing movie scores or arrangements for somebody. And eventually it was time to set it all down. And luckily, most of the ideas came back. And sure, I react to the world around me. And that's what partially my music is. But it's never conscious. I never, you know, go out looking for pathetic situations so I can write pathetic music. Sometimes happy things happen, you write really sad music. And sometimes really tragic things happen and you find a kind of peace inside yourself and you write something very beautiful. I've always wanted to make a piece for a great instrumental soloist, and possibly the best instrumental soloist I know is Dave Sanborn. Wednesday. It was Wednesday.
I was actually on the road with Stevie Wonder in 1972, and we opened for the Rolling Stones. And
Sanborn burst into a studio that I was making an album in.
after one particularly bacchanal evening,
he literally burst into the studio, screaming at the top of his lungs in the middle of a take.
just kind of rolling in on the floor. And apparently that made a big impression on Michael. He decided at that moment that I was the right person to play on that record.
And we played together as often as we could ever since. Dave Sanborn is one of the great improvisers. He has an amazing technique and amazing command of his instrument. He's of the school of musicians who see no reason why they can't just know everything about music. He studied the mechanics of reading and writing music. He knows about chord relationships. He knows more about the structure and theory of music than I do, in fact. I was absent the day they were teaching that at Juilliard. He taught me about some chord relationships, taught me how people thought about music in ways other than I was thinking. There's been a couple of saxophone concertos written that I'm aware of. A French composer named Jacques Ibert and a Russian composer named Glazunov have attempted to put the instrument in context of an orchestra. It's usually not done. The sax is the bastard child of the orchestra, and they never use it. Break after breathe. Right? I mean, that bar could take a year.
Can we get one of those guys in the little covered box holding up cards that go 3, 4, like that?
That's me.
Oh, that's you? Oh! See, I've been working with the rhythm section too long.
He tells some of the funniest jokes and the funniest stories in the world. Among them, one time I said, I'm conducting, and he said, you're conducting? You couldn't conduct if they wrapped copper wire around you and hung you from a kite. He's full of lovely lines like that. Play your bar, play your intro bar to that, and then I'll conduct it. I'll make believe I'm standing in relationship to you, because this is how I'll be, roughly. I'll be here, you'll be there.
Oh, yeah? You mean I'm not going to be back?
You'll
Can I stand back where I can see you?
Yeah.
I mean, head and face on?
This is about it. I mean, because I need to be on this level with the strings, so you'll be
a little bit.
You'll be on even with me. You'll be seeing me out of your.
Can we get a
peripheral
assistant
vision
conductor or a mirror or something?
Orchestra players tend to regard jazz players as, hooligans, some kind of other breed of creature.
It takes a certain kind of discipline to play with an orchestra. I mean, you think differently. You think about the rhythm differently. You think about intonation and timbre of the instrument. Somebody said that conducting an orchestra is like trying to row the Queen Mary through a sea of Mars bars. For me, it was very much like that, playing with it. It wasn't that they were, there was anything wrong with the way they were playing. It's just that for me, it was completely different than playing with the rhythm section, which is kind of right on top of you. The sax is an instrument that doesn't have a written literature. People give tunes to the sax player and say, hey man, blow on this. Instead of, beg your pardon, would you play this piece? And Dave's facility
at being able to listen to a piece of music and place himself in it and above it has always been uncanny. To put him in front of an orchestra was tantamount to saying, now listen to this. And that's what the guys did. That's the orchestra was like, oh my God, he plays, doesn't he?
There's nothing in the world that compares with being able to stand up in front of a big orchestra and wave your hands about until the music stops and then turn around and bow.